For the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to talk about the upcoming legislative session and the vital role that you play as city leaders in affecting good public policy in the state of Utah. Before I do that, though, I wanted to acknowledge the rest of our board of directors. You met several of them who are here this morning, but our board of directors come from cities and towns across the state. So you can see their names here, Beth Holbrook, of course, being the current president. We also on our board have representation from the City Management Association and from the Municipal Clerk Association. So you know, the year 2017 and into 2018 really have been years of transition for the League. This upcoming conference in April, you'll have the opportunity when you attend in St. George to vote on some upcoming constitutional amendments to help modernize the League Constitution and the League organization. The League Constitution was ratified in 1980. I was not yet alive in 1980. Yeah, and all the people who are like older than me just laughed, but or maybe you guys didn't laugh. Maybe it was the ones younger who laughed. Nevertheless, it's been a while since we've really taken a deep dive and a deep examination as to what the League is and what we do. So the Board of Directors has been meeting over the last year plus as part of this transition, reviewing our governing documents, and also making some necessary changes. We were in the newspaper a year or so ago as a result of an audit from the State Auditor's Office, and because of that audit, we've had quite the year of transition. I am very proud and pleased to report, though, that the League is stronger today than ever before. The League's financial house is in order, and that's in large part due to the great efforts of the League Board of Directors as well as current staff. We are in complete compliance across the board. We have established internal checks and balances, and again, we are in a stronger position today than we've ever been. So I want to applaud publicly the Board of Directors for their work as well as staff as we've worked through this transition over the last year. I mentioned that today you're hearing from some of our partners and some of our sponsors. Here's a list of all of our sponsors. And again, these sponsors help keep our costs down for conferences and trainings, and you'll be able to hear from a variety of these sponsors throughout the year. We have our sponsors come to our conferences, and then we're also starting up different communication channels so that you can hear from a variety of sponsors. You'll hear from one sponsor today in the Local Government Trust, but you can see Dominion Energy and Waste Management, and Rocky Mountain Power, and UAMPS and IRMA and Zions Bank Public Finance. All of these are valuable sponsors to the League, and they sponsor the League in large part so that they can provide service to you and to your member city and to your communities. With that being said, let's jump into the upcoming legislative session. Our objective over these next 40 or so minutes between Rachel Otto, our new Director of Government Relations, and me, is to give you a sense of how you play a vital role in the legislative process. The vast majority of you in this room are elected officials. We have 247 cities and towns, and when you multiply an average of 6 elected officials for those 247 cities and towns, that's over 1,200 elected officials that make up what we refer to as the League Army. So you and your bags all received a lapel pin of the League Army. Your voice is essential so that good public policy happens at the Capitol. You share the same constituents as legislators, and it's important that legislators understand that. The mantra that we take as we advocate for you at the Capitol is first, government closest to the people governs best. You hear from your neighbors. You are responsive to your neighbors. You need the authority in order to govern according to the will of your neighbors. Second is an informed membership. We work hard to make sure you understand what's happening at the Capitol and how it impacts your particular city regardless of size. For example, we have a weekly Friday fax email. Our hope is by the time you walk out of here today, we have your email address so that we can add your email address to our list. Once we get this, we'll forward you yesterday's Friday fax email so that you can get that information. The Friday fax email gives you the legislative update, provides announcements for upcoming events such as trainings, Local Officials Day, and others. And we also collate all of the news articles about cities that have taken place during the previous week that are relevant to you, so that there's a newsstand on our website and in our Friday fax. So it's critical we get that from you. During the legislative session, we send that email every day. You will get an email giving you an update of what happened that day. You'll get a second email identifying which bills are in committee the next day. And then we send action alerts so that you know specifically what bill is in what committee and how it impacts cities and why we need your help to call your legislators. By a quick show of hands, how many people know who your legislator is? House or Senate? Okay, keep them up so people can look around. So about 80% of you already know your legislators. That's phenomenal. That's fantastic. That's how we get our influence at the Capitol. It's not because of me. It's not because of Roger. It's not because of Rachel. It's because of you. It's because of the relationships that you have with your legislators and all of us working together. In addition to the informed membership, we rely on a network of local experts, and I'll get to that in a moment. Our third mantra is that we are problem solvers. The legislative session is 45 days. It's the shortest general session in the country for an annual session. But the legislative process is 365 days long. When the session ends on March 8th, we will celebrate a new year. You guys celebrate on January 1st. I don't celebrate until the beginning of March. And then the following Monday, we get to work talking about the next session. Then we'll meet in April at the conference, tell you not just what happened, but what to plan on happening and get your feedback and your participation. So for example, we want to know what is happening in your community that may need a legislative fix so that we can get started on that right away in order to make that fix in the following session. The power of the League, as I mentioned, is the League Army. It's you. United we stand, divided we fall. There are times where legislators will try to pit cities against each other on local government issues. And it's vital that we all remember the big picture, that we're all in this together. That you've been elected to represent your constituents and govern locally, and we collectively need to strive to maintain those tools in your toolbox. So how do you get information from us? First, you get it through the Friday Facts email. Second, you get it from our website, ulct.org. When you go to the website, you'll see that arrow is pointing to the legislative advocacy page. You click on that link, you'll have the opportunity to see our bill tracking software. We invested in this software several years ago so that you can get up-to-the-minute updates of what's happening at the Capitol. So for example, on this screenshot, you can see there's House Bill 17. So you would click on the bill tracking software, you see House Bill 17, you can click on House Bill 17 and it shows you the bill. You can see that it's a yellow priority for us, red being the highest priority, gray being the lowest, and then you can see the different tag words and keywords we have for each type of bill. So 17 is tag word general government. House Bill 19, the tag word is utilities. So maybe you really care about utilities related legislation. You could click on utilities and you'll see the list of 10 bills that impact cities, specifically utilities. This way you can essentially create your own list from our master software. Additionally, there's a function that we invested in this year that allows you to click on that bill and there'll be a button that says submit a comment. And you can click that button, write a comment, it'll go right to us as staff. So if you have a question about House Bill 17 or you want some more detail, you can email us, you can text us, or you can communicate with us directly from the software. So we think it's a very effective tool. We want you to utilize that tool. The third way you can engage with us is through the Legislative Policy Committee. The Legislative Policy Committee gives us as staff our overarching legislative direction, and we are working on developing some policy subgroups that will not be ready in time for the session, but it's part of this overall modernization of the organization that we want to get rolling in the spring after the session. Currently, we have 235 voting members of the Legislative Policy Committee. Every city and town is entitled to up to 3 voting members, and then if you have a board member, that can be a 4th voting member. We meet weekly during the legislative session and monthly during the off-season. In fact, this upcoming Monday at noon, we will meet here at the Local Government Trust for our final pre-session Legislative Policy Committee. 107 cities and towns actively participate in the Legislative Policy Committee. We want a broad cross-section of people so that we get as much feedback as possible and can advocate for you effectively. Several years ago, through a partnership with Utah State University, we've now invested in the ability to live stream all of our LPC meetings to our membership. Through the USU partnership, over the last couple of years, we've had 202 municipal officials from 53 cities and towns who have been able to participate in LPC remotely. And all you need is a screen. We'll send you the link. Click on the link, you watch on the screen, there's a chat room, so you can vote in the chat room if you're a voting member, or you can provide feedback, and we have a staff member who monitors the chat room throughout the LPC. So again, tremendous opportunity for you to engage. We know many of you have full-time jobs. You are now going to be a full-time employee, a full-time spouse, a full-time parent, a full-time civics member, and a full-time elected official. So we are trying to make it as easy as possible for you to engage with us, even if you are sitting in your office or you're at home or somewhere else, and you can engage with the LPC remotely. I mentioned that every city and town is entitled up to 3 voting representatives. You pick them. There's not a formal process for us as to who it is. Each city does it slightly differently. The requirement is the majority of the LPC must be made up of elected officials. So if you're using all 3 members and voting members, 2 of them have to be elected officials. So you may want 2 council members, you may want a mayor and a council member, that's up to you. We just ask you to provide us with the list. Because of the turnover from the November election, in part, you guys are all here, you're part of that turnover. We are frantically trying to update our list in time for the session. So go to our website at ulct.org, look at your city, and let us know if there are going to be any changes prior to the LPC beginning with the session in January. Another key component for us is what I refer to as the extended family. Many of your cities contribute expertise and staff members to help us during the session. Your staff members provide us with technical expertise. Your staff members provide us with policy insight or the practical nature of if a bill goes forward. Often bills sound great on paper, but then when you put them into effect, there are unintended consequences to it, or there's a fiscal impact to it. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, a legislator sponsored a bill that would have required every city and town in the state to live stream their council meetings. Now, out of curiosity, how many of you live stream your council meetings now? Okay, a decent number. How many of you do not? Okay, so as you can see, the majority of this room does not live stream their council meetings. This would have required every city and town, regardless of size, to live stream. After the legislator gave me the bill, I immediately contacted the president of the Municipal Clerks Association. She, in turn, contacted all of the municipal clerks in the state to ask, first, how many of you are currently live streaming? Second, how much would it cost if you were to be obligated by the state to live stream your council meetings? Within 24 hours, we had the information that it would cost millions of dollars to require cities and towns to live stream meetings. I took that information back to the legislator. He said that was not my intent. I was not trying to create this financial burden on cities, and he withdrew the bill. As the technology advances, it'll be easier and easier for cities to live stream meetings, and in fact, we've done trainings at our conference on how to live stream meetings. But we were opposed to any sort of state mandate to do it, particularly an unfunded mandate. Well, that was an example of how your staff helped us push back against a bill that would have been expensive to cities and towns. That said, there are many experienced managers and recorders and clerks and attorneys and others who've retired in recent years. So we need to reorganize and rearm in a way, and so we ask for your help. We ask for your help as an elected official, and we ask for your help in your community. Even if it's just in your city you are concerned about this one particular issue, let us know, so when that issue arises, we can reach out to you and get the feedback from your community on that specific issue. What happens on Capitol Hill? Part of the reason that we work hard to communicate with you is because things are fast and furious up there. Last year, in 45 or 46 days, President's Day does not count on the calendar, in 45 days, there were 1,272 bill requests, which was a record number. And the legislature considered 815 bills. That was a record. That record will be broken this year. Of the 815 that they considered, they passed 2/3 of them, 535, and the league tracked 283 of them. Now you see why we dedicate half of our staff to the legislative effort. 283 bills that impacted local governments in some way. Of those 283, 2/3 of them passed. Now you can see of those 283, 156 were low priority, but we still have to keep an eye on them to make sure that no toxic amendments get inserted. and we still have to give feedback to legislators about what the bill would do. We support good bills, we improve fixable bills, and we try to stop bad bills. There is inherent tension between the state government and local government. Now, we're all familiar with the inherent tension between the federal government and state government, and that dates back to 1787 and beyond. But there are pressure points between the state and local governments. And in fact, we have felt in recent years, over the last 5 years or so, we have felt like we are defending Fort McHenry. Just like Fort McHenry defended Baltimore Harbor, we're defending cities and your local authority from the cannonballs that are coming your way. Some of this tension is structural. For example, inevitably there's always one city that is a quote-unquote bad city. We hear this from legislators all the time. I was on a call actually with a senator 2 days ago who said, I'm really upset at X city and what X city is doing, so I'm running this bill to fix it. And my first response to her was, have you talked to X city? And she said, well, no, I haven't. And I said, well, let's start there. We don't need to run to the Hill and run legislation if there's an issue that can be resolved just by working together. The second structural issue is that sometimes legislators feel like state policy should trump local practice. The third structural piece feeds off of number 2. When the state has a priority and they invest money and resources into that priority, they should be able to overrule local government. And we've seen this issue pop up time and time again in recent years, whether it's the state prison, either the Draper site or the site in Salt Lake City in the Northwest Quadrant, homelessness, or other things where we see this tension. And then there are other pressure points when local government, quote unquote, infringes on fundamental rights. You heard Dave Church earlier talk about how our level of government, local government, can be the most coercive government. And so we often say with great power comes great responsibility. There's been more and more of an effort at the legislature to take a libertarian perspective on local government and portray local government as evil or corrupt. I'm not using the word corrupt. I can tell you that that word has been used many times by special interest groups about cities. You have special interest groups at the Capitol accusing you and your communities of being corrupt. And therefore the state has to step in and fix things. There's a desire for uniformity and efficiency in local governments, that all local governments should look the same, which violates a fundamental tenet for us that all cities are unique. Perceived lack of justification for fees and regulations, disruptive innovation versus local bureaucracy, turnover of elected officials, and then again the influence of special interest groups like I mentioned. So these are all the pressure points, and it is not unique to Utah. This is right out of the headlines in April. State of Texas, Governing Magazine, the end of local laws, war on cities intensifies in Texas. We are seeing this effort for state legislatures to undermine and preempt local authority in states around the country. We've been working closely with the National League of Cities to strategize on approaches to ward off this national effort to undermine local government. Here in Utah, this is a headline from a few years ago, Utah Legislature, Salt Lake City, battling over local issues. This happens all the time, and it's not just Salt Lake City. As a result, we end up playing a lot of defense on Capitol Hill. And the reason we play the defense is because what you do matters. And we want to make sure that you have the tools and the authority you need in order to govern. Here are some of the ways that we push back on your behalf. First, you have constitutional authority to govern. And sometimes legislators forget that. Second, you have statutory authority to govern and pass ordinances necessary and proper to provide for health, safety, and welfare. And again, sometimes legislators forget that. Third, we have judicial authority and legal authority to govern. And so we remind legislators of that. As I mentioned earlier, the strength of the league, though, is our membership. And I am pleased to report that the majority of the legislature is filled with strong advocates for local government. We have a champion in the governor's mansion. Governor Gary Herbert will be at Local Officials Day. He'll be awarding the Hamilton tickets to a couple of students there. He's a former county commissioner. We met with him just a few weeks ago, and he was thrilled to see cities and counties working together, and he's a local government guy. And so we're very appreciative of the governor's support. We have supporters in House and Senate leadership, and we have supporters up and down the chambers in the House and Senate, former mayors, former county commissioners, former city council members. But it is critical, even with that institutional support, that you reach out and build relationships with your legislators. So there are several things that you can do. For example, you can invite a legislator to council meeting. You can include them on your city messages that you send out to your residents. This upcoming Monday morning, Rachel and I will be in Cottonwood Heights City having a legislative breakfast with legislators, the new mayor of Cottonwood Heights and the new council of Cottonwood Heights. Have those sit-down meetings with your legislators. Take them on a police ride-along so that they can see on the ground what's happening in law enforcement. Being a mayor or a council member brings prestige. You need to use it, and you need to use it in order to make a difference at the Capitol on behalf of your constituents and on behalf of your city. You need to build those relationships of trust. Let me give you one more illustration of how this works. 3 years ago, the legislature was considering a comprehensive transportation package, House Bill 362. House Bill 362 increased the motor fuel tax, and it authorized a local option sales tax. The net result, if all of those tax levies had gone into place, would have been $200 million of new revenue for local governments to provide for the transportation needs in your cities and towns. That was a Herculean effort. It took months of meetings with legislators. I see Andrew from Wasatch Front Regional Council nodding because it was partnership with the metropolitan planning organizations, legislators, the governor's office, mayors, council members, county commissioners, you name it. We all worked together in conjunction with the business community and the Salt Lake Chamber to push forward this bill. Your colleagues, mayors and council members, generated nearly 1,000 emails, phone calls, text messages, and other things that we tracked during the session to help legislators understand why it was so vital that House Bill 362 pass. You provided examples of projects in your communities that needed the money. You sat down and told legislators that you had their backs. And we were successful at moving House Bill 362 through both bodies. It passed at 11:53 on the final night of the session with 7 minutes to spare. We were still lobbying up until 5 minutes before then to make sure that bill passed. And it was because of your efforts. There will be more House Bill 362s this year and in future years. And your participation is vital so that we have success. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to the Director of Government Relations, Rachel Otto, to talk about some of the issues that are coming in the 2018 session. I'll also let her introduce the first ever joint policy guide between the League of Cities and Towns and the Association of Counties. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Cam. I'm really excited to be talking with all of you guys today, and I look forward to working with all of you through this session. I promise that I will be hobbling along at a slightly faster pace, at least by January 22nd. I usually walk a little bit faster than I do right now. I want to spend a little bit of time giving you an overview of some of the breadth of issues that the League is approaching this year and is keeping a close eye on. And again, as you in your communities start developing your own legislative agendas and priorities, I just urge you to reach out to us, reach out to me. I'd love to know what you're working on, what's important to you, to make sure that either the League is with you or at least not getting in your way in any way. So the specific issues you'll find outlined that you have in the materials you got today. This is the joint policy guide. This year is the first year that the League has put together this joint policy guide in conjunction with the Utah Association of Counties. And in there, you'll find both our contact information and also an overview of the major issues that we're facing in conjunction with UAC this year. So the issues that we're looking at run the gamut from municipal revenue to solid waste fees. Under the municipal revenue front, taxes, property tax, sales tax are always a huge issue for cities. That's where most of our revenue comes from. That's an issue that we pay a ton of attention to and will continue to. Land use, population growth, housing, all of those things, as you guys all know, are huge issues facing Utah, something that we're engaged on a daily basis and will continue to be engaged on. Transportation, as Cameron has already mentioned, we've spent the interim session over this past year participating on the Transportation Task Force and working hard to make sure that cities are represented and city revenues are protected on that front as well. Public safety, including homelessness issues, JRI, Justice Reinvestment Initiative, water, utilities, solid waste fees, open meetings and government transparency, and then the legal front too. We have really strong partners with the Utah Municipal Attorneys Association and work with them and rely on their expertise quite a bit. So I'm going to turn this over just to Roger for one moment, but as you guys all know and will become more familiar with, municipal revenue is largely dependent on property and sales tax. That's what the split looks like today, and what about tomorrow? Roger can tell us a little bit about what we might expect to see or not expect to see this session.
The tax base, the tax policy is set at the legislative level. We're told what we can do. There's a certain amount of discretion with property tax, but in large measure, the basis, what can be taxed, et cetera, is a state policy. So we operate within that sphere. There are some major tax discussions, but I don't think they've coalesced that we're likely to see a major tax reform bill this session. However, with federal tax reform in play, that does affect the state's income tax, which all funds public education, but you don't know where the spill out of that goes onto other items, and frankly, the state's still working through that. There has been a commitment discussed about the fact that the legislature would like to expand the sales tax base, in other words, tax more things and lower the rate. Now, that's actually standard good tax policy. The problem is they haven't identified any of the new things they want to tax, which means you can't expand the base or is it new revenue in the base? And frankly, that's still a work in progress. But what seems to happen all the time is they do find things they want to untax. They want to grant exemptions, and that's something we always deal with. There was a major proposal that will surface again this year. It's been there for every year for at least 10 years, and that is to exempt manufacturing equipment that has a useful life less than 3 years. And that's, a lot of it's exempt already. That's also actually not a bad tax policy, it's just a very expensive one. And this summer we've spent considerable time with cities that are all of you are affected, but certain cities more so because they have a manufacturing base in their community. The fiscal on that bill is so big that if the legislature is willing to take $80 million out of their budget, I'm not sure they're not going to care all that much what they take out of ours. Although I think we have made a convincing argument that there's a real disproportionate impact on some of our cities. But to give you an illustration, that's the base is set by the legislature. We simply are tied to that base. So tax reform is, in my mind, still somewhat away as a coherent group of we're going to expand the sales tax base. The problem is that the decisions, as Dave Church talked about, end up being made by 3 or 4 people in the end, and they need to drive those decisions. Those are the bills you wait until the last minute to see. Property tax, I might indicate that there is a continuing discussion about truth in taxation. And I'm not going to take the discussion today about truth in taxation only to say that is the process by which you raise additional property tax revenue. One of the obligations is to run a newspaper ad that says you're raising taxes. There's actually been at least an acknowledgement that ad may have limited usefulness. I would hope that I've actually heard serious discussion about repealing it. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know. The point being, you all get a notice to your individual property about the ad's completely superfluous. The other issue is a discussion about developing an inflation component in property tax. Bear in mind, you have to raise property taxes to stay even with property taxes over time because there's no growth component to it. That's how the system was designed. Now, I recognize, I'm not saying you can choose to take other options, but the tax base itself is structured to eventually, it has no growth component in it for inflation. There is a growth for new construction. I've actually heard serious discussion about making adjustments on that. I still think that's a bit of ways as well. But those are illustrations of the types of issues. We're in a relatively booming economy, and so the legislature's been willing to fund its stuff off of growth in the economy. Is that start to slow down? the potential citizens initiative on funding education, all of those are variables out there. The point to be made is there are not concrete proposals on raising taxes or cutting taxes or reshifting taxes, but there is a constant discussion about that happening. And the question is going to be, when does that come together? I'll let you ask any questions at the end or however you want to handle it.
Okay. Thanks, Roger. So tax reform, as Roger just mentioned, everything is on the table, and we'll keep you apprised of developments in that arena for sure. So population growth. Over the last year, Utah, along with some of our western neighbors, has become one of the fastest growing, or the fastest growing state in the nation. Population growth, I'm sure many of you have heard the statistics that our population here is going to double by 2040. How many of you are dealing with population growth in your cities? How many of you are dealing with the problem of affordable housing, housing affordability? Most of you, I imagine. So what does that mean? What do those numbers actually look like? And I know that if you guys don't know Cameron very well yet, you will soon know that he is a huge sports fan. So what does that actually look like annually? What those numbers look like are approximately 60,000 new residents in Utah every year. So that's equivalent to the city of Taylorsville, or also the size of a fully filled LaBelle Edwards Stadium. You'll notice, of course, that both major teams are represented on that slide.
Just notice there's only BYU that had this filled stadium.
I'll let Cameron respond to that when he comes back up here. So, affordable housing and housing affordability is an issue that we're incredibly engaged on a daily basis. And some of our stakeholders are also putting pressure on cities. This editorial is one example of outside pressure on cities to change zoning, to have the state come in and make decisions on local land use authorities in your cities, as opposed to allowing your cities to organically grow and plan and develop in the way that you best see fit. So one of the things that we, of course, come back to time and time again are cities get to choose their own destinies. And of course, we want to support smart policy, but we also want to maintain local control. Many of you probably saw this article in the Salt Lake Tribune yesterday. A proposal was mentioned that fees could be levied against cities that lack affordable housing. This is a difficult proposition, and we haven't seen a bill yet, or a specific bill yet. But these are the kinds of ideas that are floating around out there that we're working on, where there's a lot of pressure from developers, and there's a lot of developer influence in the legislature. And we work through the Land Use Task Force and in other arenas to respond to those pressures in a way that works best for cities and best for local government. One of the other pressures that comes along partly with population growth, partly with housing affordability, is the homelessness issue. And there has been we've received information from a number of cities that have seen the consequences of Operation Rio Grande and other initiatives outside of Salt Lake City. Well, as you learn about this and as you go forward, we're collecting that data. We want to go back. We want to be able to go back to legislators and be able to have the conversation of, okay, we've all agreed that homelessness is a statewide issue. The state has invested a lot of money and resources in tackling the homelessness issue. And if cities are also being asked to contribute, regardless of whether you're a shelter site or the site of various resources to respond to homelessness or to divert homelessness, we want to be able to go back to legislators and have the conversation. Here's the actual data. Here are the consequences that our cities are suffering based on this initiative that is a state priority, that is a big deal. So Carson Eilers in the back, who you were introduced to earlier, he's spearheading the effort to collect that data. And as you go forward, if you talk to your police chiefs, if you talk to social services in your cities, and you hear from let's say your police chief, that they are responding to more calls, or that their officers are getting called about potentially homeless people in the community. If your public works department says that they are spending more resources on cleaning up homelessness camps. If you talk to social service providers in your community and they say that they're overwhelmed or they're getting more calls for service, please let us know. Start tracking that data and let us know so that we can make sure that legislators are informed when cities are asked to contribute to this effort, what the impacts are and what cities are already spending to deal with this problem. So, shifting the conversation to transportation, another huge issue that we've been very engaged on since 2015 and before, since HB 362. But over this past interim session, Cameron has been sitting on the Transportation Task Force in a variety of different subgroups and working on this issue. Booming population growth obviously leads to increased pressures on transportation. How to plan for that transportation infrastructure and how to fund it are big problems, or big problems that we're working on solutions. This is, Utah is actually well out front of many places and is always commended for how well the stakeholders in Utah come together and plan. And that's largely thanks to the MPO, the metropolitan planning organizations that we have in Utah, which include Wasatch Front Regional Council. You'll have the opportunity to have a breakout session with Andrew Gruber, who's in the back there. He's the executive director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council, and talk in more detail about some of these planning efforts. But Utah just came out in 2015 with an updated Unified Transportation Plan. And this is something that is a huge credit to the MPOs, to UDOT, to UTA, and all of those organizations to start planning for this major population growth and how we're gonna get everybody on the road that needs to get from point A to point B, whether it's transit, whether it's active transportation, whether it's building additional roads. So the Transportation Task Force at this point they've broken into subgroups over the last year. They've come back with recommendations that they're going to provide to the whole Transportation Committee, or they have provided to the whole Transportation Committee. So we'll be keeping an eye, of course, on what bills come out of this initiative over the past year. But at this point, there are these recommendations on land use, economic development, that you can see here and that are also outlined in your policy guide. Part of that is also corridor and area planning. And this is another kind of shot at local authority and land use planning here. So, of course, because transportation is such a big issue, and because our legislators want cities to plan in certain ways in order to account for transportation infrastructure, instead of letting cities kind of go through the planning processes and the collaborative efforts that they've gone through up to this point, there has been some discussion about coming in and making sure that there are these certain corridors or areas where cities have to zone in certain ways. So we're pushing back hard on that. Cities traditionally here, with help from MPOs, have done a great job of coordinating and planning and zoning appropriately at the critical transportation cross sections and corridors. So we'll be keeping an eye on that for sure. UTA governance is part of it too. I'm sure many of you have been following that conversation about changing the structure of UTA. UCLT is pushing back on changes to that governance structure that would impact local authority. Right now, our local jurisdictions have appointment power on the UTA board, and any change to that governance that's going to lessen local influence on UTA while still requesting local dollars is something that concerns us. So the league has long-standing positions that fight back on taking away this local authority. And you can see, starting in 2007, we have traditionally and repeatedly said that we will oppose legislation that attempts to take away or limit the authority of local elected officials to make your own decisions for your communities. And I want to point you back to the legislative guide. On page 2 here, you'll see a prism that, and we're trying to get this into the hands of every legislator that we meet with and that we talk to. So our goal is that every legislator will have a copy of this guide and will know what's in it. But this is the prism that we're asking about every single bill. So first, what is the problem that the bill is trying to solve? Is the bill a one-size-fits-all approach? Does the bill empower or restrict the local control of local governments? And does the bill have a financial impact on local government? So those four things, that prism sums up the approach that we take, that we have traditionally taken and will continue to take on every bill. So first, is there a problem, or is the bill a solution looking for a problem? The one size fits all, obviously, we want you, the experts and the leaders in your communities, to be able to make the decisions for your community, not come in and impose one solution that is supposed to work for every community. So you can always go back to this prism, and please feel free to talk this up to legislators as you are talking about legislation that impacts your community and legislation that comes up during this session. So this year was no exception. This year at Annual, the League unanimously approved this resolution that says cities and towns within the state of Utah commit that we're ready and willing to collaborate with the state, the community, and other stakeholders to pursue future economic development opportunities, including this transportation infrastructure, but that we cannot support development proposals, task forces, commissions, districts, et cetera, that would deprive local municipalities of your traditional local land use authority on private property, or deprive you of tax increment generated within your jurisdiction without your consent. So this is the stand that our members have taken this year, this September, at our conference, and this will be guiding us throughout the legislative session. Shifting gears to another issue that we've been intimately involved with, and this you'll kind of see the breadth of issues. So it's statewide transportation planning, all the way to solid waste fees. And you, as the lucky local officials you are, I'm sure will get intimately involved with all sorts of things you never thought you would learn about, including solid waste fees. So the League has been part of a coalition that has been dealing with the fallout of HB 115, which was passed last year, and has developed a proposal to counter the Department of Environmental Quality's proposal on how to charge for these solid waste fees. So we've been pushing DEQ to say, or to get information from them on what is the cost of the regulation, what is the cost of the service you're providing, what is the cost of the regulation that we're paying for. Right now, the coalition has come up with a proposal that actually generates the Department of Environmental Quality more revenue, and that we think is fair and equitable and is based on the use that you actually get. DEQ has looked at all of the cities and towns and has said, or all of the users of landfills, and said everyone will pay one rate. So this could impact your revenue and your quite a bit. So at this point, we have one LPC, as Cameron mentioned, one Legislative Policy Committee meeting again on next Monday, on January the 8th, and then we meet every Monday throughout the session. And we would love to, of course, have your participation on any and all of those. And again, feel free to please reach out to us individually, personally, any one of us on staff, to let us know what you're up to, what you're concerned about, what your priorities are. Finally, I just wanted to mention some of the land use issues, and you'll have the opportunity to hear from Meg Ryan, who's our land use manager, in more detail here. But land use is an issue that is critically important to pretty much every city and town, I would think. And again, it goes back to we must defer to the local land use policies and ordinances. However, as Cameron mentioned earlier, it's also, with this great power comes great responsibility, and updating your land use code is very important. So the court reviews local land use decisions to determine if they were correct, but one bad bill, if you haven't updated your code, one bad bill can, or one bad city can lead to legislation that regulates all cities. And the tie goes to the runner there, which is the meaning of that picture. So if you have vague language in your code, you are going to end up being on the wrong side of that court decision. Okay, and with that, here is all of our contact information, which you'll also find in the legislative guide. And again, a reminder to sign up for Friday Facts and sign up for the daily emails that you'll be getting. We'll let you know what bill is up and what committee when. We'll let you know what's happening, and we'll be reaching out to you for your own local expertise and your opinion on all of these issues as we go forward. Thank you.
Are there any legislative-related questions for Rachel or Roger or for me? Any questions about issues or process? Yep.
I have a question regarding sales tax. Many of the online companies are now paying sales tax back to the states, or are going to force to. Amazon is paying sales tax back to the state of Utah. As I understand it, none of that sales tax is redirected to communities where the purchases were originated. And in a rural community such as mine, where we have very few retail opportunities, Amazon is a huge shopping center for us. What can we do to try to get a percentage of that before the state becomes incredibly comfortable with the vast amount of money they're receiving?
Online sales tax has been a major issue over the last few years. We have advocated strongly to get that online sales tax revenue. It's a tax that is already owed, and we've advocated strongly to get that revenue back into local government. I'll let Roger address it from there.
There are two issues here that I think it's important to distinguish. There are the online sales where the entity doesn't have a physical presence in the state and therefore doesn't collect the tax. That issue, we hope there will be a federal resolution of that. It still may, but I think the states have elected to go back to the Supreme Court to look for a resolution. That could take another 5 or 6 years. But that's the issue of escape taxation money. There is a second issue, though, that I think gets blurred in this, and that is online sales where the tax is being paid and coming into the state of Utah. And that's a different issue. And I want to be clear. I hear a lot of things about this is what the policy is. There are two components to the distribution of the sales tax. Half of the sales tax dollars are distributed to all of your communities in the state on the basis of population. The other half stays in the place where the sale was consummated or takes place. Historically, that's where the stores are located. But what online sales purchases have changed, there is no physical store that's sourced to. So it's sourced now to where the product is delivered. So those boxes that pile up on my front porch, because my wife loves Amazon, all of those purchases, which the tax is collected on, are sourced to Centerville as the point of sale, in addition to Centerville keeping its percentage of the population. So the money is coming back to your communities. It's done on a 10-digit zip code basis. I just want to indicate that it does come back to your communities. But I think the bigger issue that raises is, for years we have been debating the battle over, do our cities chase retail at the exclusion of other development? The answer is, in some cases, yes, they have. I think it's a lot less than the stories would say, but it clearly has happened. The change of retail operations means the dimension of chasing retail may be gone. We don't know where that's going to shake out. Building a big mall or getting a big box was always sort of the panacea for developing your real estate. I'm not sure we're going to have another mall built. So one of the things we want to emphasize to the legislature, because there's a constant battle to change the distribution formula, is we are in the midst of a complete change of how retail is handled. So in point of fact, you may not be chasing retail at all, because if it's sourced to my front porch, Centerville's getting It's population, and it's also the point of sale, and those same things are happening within your community. So I want to emphasize there's the not collecting tax component, and then there is the sourcing where they are paying tax on sales.
Excuse me, so you said there's a sales tax based on delivery, not address, not order address, correct?
It is, if you order it over Amazon, Amazon delivers it to your home or wherever else they want to deliver it. The sale is consummated where the delivery takes place. It's not going to a store. There's no store dimension in there. The point of sale that's reported by Amazon is your home.
It goes to where the delivery happens.
The delivery, yeah, in most instances, your home. It's the delivery address.
Then you mentioned also about the component of the 5-digit zip code and the 4-digit sector code. I know Vineyards here, Highland and Vineyard do not have our own zip code, and so we are mired in with other municipalities. We're worried about getting the credit.
I will tell you, I understand the concerns, and I don't want to get into a really lengthy discussion because I can actually have the tax commission come. I've spent hours with it. They source it pretty doggone close.
In fact, Vineyard's not alone. We have multiple cities who share zip codes. So we pushed to make sure the tax commission was looking at those additional 4 or 5 digits, again, to get it down to the neighborhood level.
If I were to leave one item, though, when you talk to the legislators, tell them it's our money. It's not theirs on the distribution of the local portion. Stay out of how we redistribute money, because if there isn't new money, all we're doing is cannibalizing each other's revenue.
Yep, amen. Amen. The reason Roger says it's your money is all of your cities back in the 80s passed an ordinance to impose that 1% local option. And by passing that local option, 50% and 50%, the 50-50 formula is part of that local option. And there are legislators who have been trying for years to change the 50-50 formula without providing any additional revenue, which essentially means you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and we have refused to support any type of effort on that front unless there's significant new money. When that 50-50 formula came into place in 1983, the legislature, as a result, increased our local option from 3/4 cent to 1 cent, so it increased by 1/3. They haven't put a proposal like that on the table now, which is why we've been opposed to any changes in the formula. So I saw a couple hands over here. Let's start here.
Wait, 2 more quick questions onto that. So first of all, if the revenue is going back to where the package is delivered, is there any way to change that? Because I'm making the purchases. If a store had been in my town, I would have been making the purchases in my town and then sending those gifts to my grandkids. I don't want where my grandkids live to get the tax money. I want my town to get the tax money. So that's question 1. And then question 2, is there any entity where I can get a report of how much of that tax was actually paid back to my community?
So to the question, can it be changed? You can always change things, but changing that would be really hard because Utah's a signatory to a group called the Streamlined Sales Tax. You either have destination sourcing or you don't, and it would be a massive change in the system.
This is where the credit card zip code is.
Bear in mind that they're reported as saying you bought it somewhere. Where that somewhere is where the product's delivered. That's called sourcing. I don't know what other place there is. When you buy it at a store, you carry it out. The store is the physical location. But if there isn't a physical location, it's where the product ends up at, where its destination is. And no, that would be a huge change.
Okay, and then can I get a report, anything?
I would say the report, but every community gets a sales tax distribution report every month of the amount of sales tax that comes to your community. It is a highly confidential report. You get to go to jail if it's disclosed, by the way. So what it is you've got there is a person within your community that gets that information. So the tax commission knows, has a store opened up and they haven't been paying a sales tax, et cetera. As far as the broader issues of how much money is distributed back to you, that probably also, and then I'll check more. That might be more public. I was on the tax commission for 12 years. The one thing we hammered into our employees, there are extraordinarily stringent laws on income and sales tax about disclosure of information. it carries felony penalties if it's disclosed. So be very careful. Your cities have a person that can see it. It is not a publicly disseminatable information.
So a question here?
Yeah.
Steve Joyce from Park City. You guys are talking about the legislative efforts for the 45 days, but there's a number of referendums that are kind of cooking. Do you guys participate in those at all?
2018 is going to be a historic year for state initiatives. The state initiatives that are moving forward range from marijuana legalization to an increase in income and sales tax for education, the Better Boundaries group. I'm missing a few, but I believe there could be as many as 6. We do not engage in any sort of statewide initiative effort with one key exception, and that is if there's an initiative that will impact cities in some way, then it is our duty to articulate what that impact will be. There's a question within the law about when it's appropriate for us as a public entity to speak up. If we speak up during the signature gathering phase, if we speak up once it actually becomes an initiative, and whether or not it's an initiative during the signature gathering phase or whether it's an initiative once it actually passes the signature threshold. You also use the word referendum, and there are multiple referendums around the state, both on a local level. There aren't any state referendums right now, but certainly referendums are a tool that citizens use on a regular basis as a check on a government act. We've been in the process over the last year plus of working with several legislators to try to modernize the local initiative and referendum laws to try to make it clearer when you as a city can articulate and explain why you did what you did when citizens refer your decision. We've got time for one more question. I thought I saw another hand over here.
I go order large wheelie delivery address is to a home. If it was an internet cell, it would be a delivery address. But that was kind of the question. Well, RC Willie's, are they saying that they take control of the product there and then they deliver it to you? That was just a sales tax estimate.
Sales tax, I always love it when people say sales tax is an easy tax, so we ought to go to. Sales tax is very easy for the customer. It's nightmarish for the businesses. The basic principles are the point of sale, the point of delivery is where the company or the entity that's in charge of the product relinquishes that control. That's the normal principle. That's the destination source. So if you buy it at an RC Willie's store, you carry it out of the store. If you have it delivered, you pay common carry and you're saying, deliver it to my house, the destination will be your house for sales tax purposes. It matters only in a state like Utah because we have a point of sale component in our distribution. If it was based on something else, it wouldn't matter. But those are the basic principles. Same as you could order a car and have it delivered to your house and the sales tax will be sourced to your house. Most people don't do that.
At least not right now. As you review your legislative guide, if you have any questions about any of the issues herein or anything else, hopefully one thing you've recognized from us is we are a staff filled with policy nerds. Another member of our legislative team who's not here today is a man named John Hiskey. John has been in local government longer than I've been alive and is also part of our legislative effort. He's been a former deputy mayor and Economic Development Corporation of Utah director and has been involved in legislation for 30 plus years. So between Roger, John, me, Rachel, Brandon, Carson, we're happy to answer any questions at any time. Again, the key component in this guide is what Rachel articulated, the prism we want legislators to use and the definition of local authority above it. So take a look at it, let us know if you have any questions, and thank you for the questions that were asked today.